All right, welcome back to the Working Man's Kollel. We took a 1-week hiatus, but we are back to finish the 12th chapter of Masechah Shabbos. We are now more than halfway through Masechah Shabbos. It's been quite a journey, but now we're getting into the more the faster moving parts of the Masechta, where we talk about in some detail the malachos, the 39 categories of labor. So I want to, I know you guys are already ahead of me. You guys are already in the 13th chapter. Is that right, Charlie and Jack? And Mark, yeah. Barry, yeah. You guys get together on Mondays to do the Mishnayos. You go through them quicker than me. So I'm finishing the 12th chapter today. So the 12th chapter ends with a Mishnah that's a fundamental Mishnah. It's unbelievable that this fundamental Mishnah over here is stuck into the end of the 12th chapter. Take a look at what the Mishnah says. HaKosef Beis Osios. So let's say someone, we know that the halacha is about the labor of writing. Writing on Shabbos is prohibited. Any form of writing, the Gemara says, even if it's a ksiva she'ena shel kayama, while it may not be biblically prohibited to write something that is not going to last, but at least on a rabbinic level, it's still a prohibition. For example, let's say you have those big cars, you have those cars when they get mud all over them, and you write on it "wash me" or something like that. So even though that may not be a deoraisa prohibition of ksiva, but definitely midirabanan, that would be a prohibition. Or you write "I love Shabbos" on it. In reality, you should write "I love Chillul Shabbos" on it. Right? So the malacha, though, on a deoraisa level, is the malacha of writing 2 letters. Why? Again, it all goes back to the Mishkan. In the Mishkan, what were they doing when they were writing? So the purpose of writing when they were building the Mishkan was that, the Mishkan was the traveling Beis HaMikdash, right? It was the traveling Mishkan of God that, the Shekhinah would rest. And as Bnei Yisrael were wandering through the wilderness, they had a place to serve God. But they would deconstruct it when it was time to move and then construct it again. So the way you knew how to reconstruct it was like anything. You need to know, what parts click into what board goes next to what. They weren't going to write up new blueprints every single time that they got to a new spot. There was a set blueprint of how to do it. And they would make notes on the sides of the boards to know this board goes next to that board. So they put a 1 next to a 1, and then a 2 next to a 2, and a 3 next to a 3. Like that, they would know what board connects to what. So that is the biblical prohibition of writing on Shabbos. However, if you wrote only 1 letter, that on a d'oraisa standpoint is not a prohibition. Writing only 1 letter is not a prohibition from the Torah. You would not be obligated to bring a carbon. It is not a prohibition from the Torah. Comes along the Mishnah and says the following: HaKosef Beis Osios b'shtei halamos. Okay, now we know that in order for me to, another one of the prerequisites to having to bring a carbon for violating Shabbos is, we saw the Mishnah at the beginning of the chapter, or the end of the last chapter, excuse me, that spoke about how you need to violate the entire malacha, you need to do the entire labor in 1 ha'alama, meaning a halama is in 1 forgetful period. Okay, so we learned in the 7th chapter that the definition of shogeg, of doing a malacha by accident, means that for whatever reason, maybe I didn't realize that that doing this on Shabbos was prohibited. I know that it's Shabbos. I just didn't realize that doing this is prohibited on Shabbos. I know exactly what I'm doing. I just don't realize that I'm violating Shabbos. So that's called a halama. So let's say a person forgot the fact that writing on Shabbos is prohibited, and they write 1 letter, okay? Then they remember after that, that I know I'm not supposed to write on Shabbos. They remember, okay? So in such a scenario, would you have to bring a carbon? No. Why? Because you only wrote one letter in your moment of displacement. In your moment of confusion, you only wrote one letter, which in and of itself is not a violation of Shabbos. But let's say in my moment of confusion, I wrote two letters, then I would have to bring a carbon on Shabbos. But going back to the example of that, during my moment of confusion, I wrote one letter. Then I remember that, it is Shabbos. And then later on, I forget again that it's Shabbos, and I write another letter, okay? So again, now I've written two letters. So the Gemara wonders now, the Mishnah wonders now, if during that moment of confusion, in between these two halamos, okay, is that enough to combine the two? If you treated each one isolated, you wouldn't have to bring a carbon at all, because each one standing on its own was not a deoraisa violation of Shabbos. In each one isolated, you only wrote one letter. However, if you combine them and you say, no, that together they make one violation of Shabbos, so then you would have to bring a carbon. That's exactly what the Mishnah deals with. So the Mishnah says, I have a displaced confusion in between the writing of the two letters. Or I write one letter in the morning and one letter in the afternoon. What about in those scenarios? So Rabbi Gamliel says it's problematic. The Chachamim potern. However, the Chachamim say that you are off the hook. Okay, so according to Rabbi Gamliel, you would have to bring a carbon. That even though each one isolated on its own, you would be off the hook. But in such a scenario, we would combine them, because at the end of the day, you wrote two letters on Shabbos. However, the rabbis, the Chachamim, say no. In such a scenario, we still treat them as two isolated situations. The Gemara wonders, what is the machlokas over here? But my kamiflagi, the Gemara wonders, what are Rabbi Gamliel and the Chachamim arguing about? So says the Gemara, Rabbi Gamliel savar ein yediyah lachatzi shir. According to Rabbi Gamliel, there's no such thing as you having, in halacha, conceptually, we don't view that, I was confused and then I remember it was Shabbos. If you didn't actually do a complete malacha, then that remembering that happened is unconsequential. It doesn't matter. That the whole halacha of this concept of remembering something and forgetting something only applies if you actually violated something. But if you didn't violate something, so then it's as if that never happened. Okay? It's as if your confusion never happened. Again, confusion is the recipe for being obligated to bring a carbon, right? So your confusion never happened on a conceptual halachic level. So therefore, we view as if you actually did both together. You wrote both letters together, and therefore you have to bring a carbon. However, Rabbanan Savri, the Rabbanan hold yesh yediyah lachatzi shir. The rabbis hold that no. That confusion that took place for one letter, it isolates it, and then the confusion that happened for the second letter isolates it as well. This is the machlokas between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Gamliel. Extremely, extremely, extremely conceptual, extremely esoteric, very, very difficult to wrap your head around. So you have to really think when you learn through this Mishnah. This is not like one of these practical Mishnayos that, this is even when the Rambam records this halacha, he doesn't record it in Hilchos Shabbos. He records it in Hilchos Shkagos, which have to do with bringing carbon chatas, all the laws of bringing carbon chatas. That's where the Rambam records it. It's extremely, extremely, extremely conceptual.
You could almost argue by Rabbi Gamliel's logic that they didn't write anything, that each time they didn't really violate anything or didn't even write anything.
That's exactly Rabbi Gamliel's point, is that nothing happened.
Right.
Each one is as if nothing happened. But we'll get to that soon. We'll get to that, whether or not he really views that.
But if you're writing, you're picking up a pen.
Yeah.
Which is muhsa.
Right. But muksa is only a rabbinic prohibition, Harvey.
Okay.
Meaning, the whole point of muksa is, it's a machlokes between the Rambam and the Ravid, whether or not we're concerned that you're going to carry it into the public domain, and that's why we're not allowed to pick up these things on Shabbos. Or the concern is that you're going to do a malacha with it. It's a rabbinic concern, muksa. Here we're talking about whether or not you have to actually bring a carbon, you have to bring a sacrifice to the temple for having violated Shabbos, right? So there's a fascinating machlokas over here between Rashi and Tosfos with regard to how we understand this line of the Mishnah. When the Mishnah says achas shachris va'achas ben arbaim, meaning you wrote one letter in the morning and one letter in the afternoon. In such a scenario, the Mishnah is equating it to as if you wrote two letters in two different lapses of understanding of what you were doing. Okay? So how do we understand this line? What's this line adding in the Mishnah? When the Mishnah says you wrote one in the morning and one in the afternoon, what's that adding? So Rashi says something fascinating over here. He says, well, it must be this is a separate case. Rashi writes the following. Look what Rashi says. Rashi says, where the Mishnah says, achas shachris v'achas ben arbaim, Rashi says, kivan dahavile shahus ben time. Because there was time between the first letter you wrote and the second letter you wrote, since there was that lapse of time, meaning even if the entire time you didn't realize, you never remembered it was Shabbos, the entire time you assumed it was Sunday. Meaning this entire day you assume it's Sunday. From the morning till the afternoon. However, says Rashi, Kidei Leida, but since there was time for you to have remembered that it was Shabbos, Havile Kishtei Ha'alamus. We treat that as two separate confusions. So Rashi is telling us a tremendous chiddush over here, that if a confusion lasts so long that that you should have remembered at some point in the middle between the actions that you did, says Rashi, that is considered to be two separate forgetful periods. And if there are two separate forgetful periods, then you're not going to be liable a carbon according to Rabbi Gamliel, and according to the Chachamim, you still would be because we connect them. But what comes out according to Rashi is an unbelievable opinion according to Rabbi Gamliel. That Rashi's understanding of Rabbi Gamliel is, remember the Mishnah in the 7th chapter when we spoke about someone who does malacha all day on Shabbos, and each thing that they did, they knew it was Shabbos, but they didn't realize that they have to bring, they didn't realize that planting is prohibited. They didn't realize that plowing is prohibited. They thought Shabbos was a day where you don't watch TV. But everything else on Shabbos they thought was perfectly good to go. They didn't realize you're not allowed to, that you're not allowed to plant, you're not allowed to plow, you're not allowed to harvest, you're not allowed to cook, you're not allowed to do any of these things on Shabbos. They thought that, yeah, everything's allowed on Shabbos, okay? So they knew it was Shabbos, but they had a confusion for 39 separate things, 39 separate malachos. So the Mishnah said, you have to bring 39 karbanos. According to Rashi's opinion of understanding Rabbi Gamliel, that according to Rabbi Gamliel, Rashi would say that that is only true if you do each of the 39 items consecutively. If there's a large time delay between, let's say, planting and plowing, so then you are only going to be obligated to bring one of the, according to Rabbi Gamliel, in that scenario, you would have to bring, according to Rashi, if I planted and then a time elapsed and then I plowed, so Rashi just told me that time elapsed. I should have realized at some point that the day was Shabbos. So according to Rashi then, with his understanding of Rabbi Gamliel, that is going to cancel both out. That's a wild thing. That a lapse of time is going to cancel something out, according to Rabbi Gamliel. So that's the opinion of Rashi, that this is a totally separate case. Tosfos says that I'll show you a Gemara. Tosfos is going to show us a Gemara where it can't be that this is a completely separate case. Take a look at the Gemara right over here. The Gemara says the following scenario. Again, writing 2 letters on Shabbos is prohibited from the Torah. So says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Ami said, Kasav os achas b'Tveria. Let's say I wrote 1 letter in Tveria, the achas b'Tzipori, and another letter I wrote in Tzipori. Now, the distance between Tveria and Tzipori is about 20 miles, about 18, 20 miles between Tveria and Tzipori. So let's say on Shabbos I wrote 1 letter in Tveria and 1 letter in Tzipori. Chayev, says the Gemara, I am liable for writing on Shabbos. Okay, the Gemara explains, because let's say we're talking about a scenario where you wrote 1 letter on 1 page and a letter on another page. So really all you have to do is take 1 page and put it next to the next one, and next to the second one that you wrote on, and that's going to create 2 letters being together. And even though one is in one town and one's in another town, it's not a problem. Hold on 1 second. Says Tosfos. I'm very confused over here, because according to the Chachamim, if I wrote 1 letter in the morning and 1 letter in the afternoon, so according to the Chachamim, I'm not liable. According to Rabbi Gamliel, I am. According to the Chachamim, I'm off the hook. I wrote 1 letter in the morning and 1 letter in the afternoon. In this scenario, the Tveria Tzibori case, what's going on over here? I wrote 1 letter in Tveria and another letter in Tzipori. Now it's Shabbos. How on Shabbos am I getting from Tveria to Tzipori? I'm not taking an Acela train. I'm not getting in a car. I'm not going on a fast horse. How am I going in these 18 miles between Tveria and Tzipori? Going from the northeast part of Israel to the north central part of Israel. How am I doing that on Shabbos? I'm walking. I am walking from one to the other. I'm not getting on a plane. I am walking.
But aren't you going outside the Tchum Shabbos?
So let's assume that there's not an issue of Tchum. Let's assume that there's a residential area from Tveria all the way to Tzipori. So conceptually, though, the only way I can get there is if there's some sort of a large time elapse, a time delay. So then, if that's the case, according to the Chachamim, I should be off the hook here. Why is the Gemara telling me? This is on the previous Omid. Why does the Gemara tell me over here that I'm chayiv? Yeah, an unbelievable question that Tosfos is asking. So Tosfos says it must be that this is not a separate case in our Mishnah. That in our Mishnah, this is just it's another application of the same case, where it's a case where you wrote 1 letter and then you forgot about the fact that you're not allowed to write on Shabbos. Then you remembered, then you forgot again, and then you remembered again when you wrote the second letter, right? You go through this double confusion. And it must be the same case. In the morning, I forgot that I'm not allowed to write. Then at some point during the day, I remembered again that I'm not allowed to write. And then in the afternoon, I forgot again. And that's why I ended up writing these 2 letters on Shabbos. The Chum say I'm off the hook. However, the case in Tzipori is that the entire time I knew it was, the entire time I forgot it was Shabbos. And therefore, I am going to be liable in that scenario. Okay. So what I'd like to focus on now is when the Gemara says that the machlokes between the Gamliel and the rabbis is regarding how do we treat this writing 1 letter. That writing 1 letter is only treated as a chetzi shir. It's treated as doing half of the minimum amount of the malacha. Again, the minimum amount to violate writing on Shabbos is by writing 2 letters. Here, I wrote 1 letter. So that's a chatzi shir, the Gemara called it. A the Chatzi Shir. So now Chatzi Shir in general, the Gemara on Daf Ayin Dalid said that Chatzi Shir applies to Shabbos. Basically, Chatzi Shir is a machlokes between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, where if I do not fill the entire requirement of violating the prohibition from the Torah, I do a portion of it. Let's say I nibble one small bite of a number 6 from Carl's Jr. Okay, I take one little nibble from it. Okay, in such a scenario, I did not eat enough in order for me to have violated the biblical prohibition of eating a cheeseburger. So I am not going to be liable. I'm not going to get lashes for such a thing. However, just because I'm not getting lashes for it, does that mean that it is biblically permitted and only the rabbis prohibited it? Or is it that, no, this is biblically prohibited as well? So according to Reish Lakish, this is a biblical, according to Reish Lakish, this would only be a rabbinic prohibition. However, Rabbi Yochanan says that this is a biblical prohibition, that if I take a nibble of a cheeseburger, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that is a biblical prohibition. And he quotes it from a pasuk where the pasuk says, Kol basar lo yachel, that you're not allowed to eat any amount of non-kosher meat, which he learns from that pasuk that any small amount would be prohibited. Another reason the Gemara gives is because eating one small amount is one step before eating one big amount, right? So since eating a small amount, so if I eat 2 small amounts, that equals a big amount. So then that also, being that it is significant enough to potentially get me to have violated the Torah prohibitions, therefore we even treat this as a Torah prohibition. But anyway, this is a machlokes between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. We pass like Rabbi Yochanan that Chatzi Shir Aser Min Torah, that half of the prohibition is prohibited from the Torah. What about on Shabbos? Does the same apply to Shabbos, or is this only a halacha regarding prohibited foods? So there's a famous opinion of the Chacham Tzvi, that the Chacham Tzvi says that this only applies to prohibited foods. But according to most poskim, the Minchas Chinuch, Mishnah Berurah, 99% of the poskim apply this to other prohibitions as well, including Shabbos. And it seems like that from the Rambam. The Rambam right over here, dealing with our Mishnah, when he quotes our Mishnah, writes, Chenim kasav os achas b'Shabbos. Let's say I write one letter on Shabbos, says the Rambam, bishgaga, in that confused state, v'nodalo, and then later I remember that it's Shabbos, v'chazer v'shachach, and then I forget again that it's Shabbos. V'kasav oshniya, and then I write another letter. Smuchala, right next to the first one. Behelam sheni. So because they were 2 separate forgetful periods, pater mikarban chatas, I would not be liable to bring a karban chatas. What does that mean? I'm not liable to bring a karban chatas. What should the Rambam have said? Just pater. It's not a prohibition. He says I don't have to bring a karban chatas. What does that sound like? That while I don't have to bring a karban chatas, it's still prohibited from the Torah, right? I don't have to bring a karban, but there's still a prohibition over here. So the Rambam seems to be saying that writing one letter on Shabbos would be a prohibition from the Torah. And this is the way that the Minchas Chinuch paskins as well. Writing only one letter would not be a rabbinic prohibition, it would be a biblical prohibition. And it wouldn't be like, and it would be like every other Chatzi Shir, that it is not rabbinically prohibited, but it is a D'oraisa prohibition. There is a third opinion found in the Tanaim, though. So we've now seen 2 opinions in the Tanaim. According to Rabbi Gamliel, and according to the Chachamim, actually, writing one letter on Shabbos, according to the Rambam's understanding of them, is a biblical prohibition, writing one letter. Okay, it's a biblical prohibition. The only question is whether or not I have to bring a karban. Okay? The problem, though, is that there's a Tosefta. And I don't have a good answer. It may not be that it's a problem. It could be that it's just a, it pretty much is a problem. I really don't know what to do with this Tosefta. Because there's a Tosefta in Beitza, in Parak Dal Halacha Beis, that the Tosefta, which is a collection of Tanaic literature. So this is of the same stature of a Mishnah, okay? The Tosefta writes the following: Hakosef os achas bein kosle hakodesh bein bekisvei hakodesh bein bekisvei hados. So let's say I write one letter on Shabbos. Regardless, I was writing a secular book, I was writing a Torah book, doesn't matter. I wrote one letter on Shabbos. Says Hakosev os achas bein bekisvei hakodesh bein bekisvei hayo b'Shabbos chayev chates b'yom tev lo k'varbayim divrei Rabbi Lazar. According to Rabbi Lazar, I am obligated to bring a carbon, okay, for writing only one letter. That's not how we paskin. We paskin that you need to write two letters in order for you to be liable to bring a carbon. The Chachamim omer, however, the Chachamim say, bein b'Shabbos, bein b'Yom Tov, whether it's Shabbos or Yom Tov, eino chayiv, you're not going to be liable, ella, rather, only in a scenario where it would be mishum shulus. It would only be prohibited on a rabbinic level. So hold on one second. According to the Chachamim that's brought down in Tosefta, if I write only one letter on Shabbos, that is a rabbinic prohibition. But according to the Rambam we just saw, who brought down from our Mishnah, he's saying that it's pater mikarbon chatas, that it is still biblically prohibited. It seems to be that this is a machlokas between the Tosefta and the Mishnah of how to approach the opinion of the rabbis. That is this a biblical prohibition of writing one letter that you just don't have to bring a carbon for, or is this not even a biblical prohibition? There is a gra that says, the Vilna Gaon says that you could have that sometimes, where there's just a sugis chalukos, where you have two different primary sources that just seem to contradict each other, and okay, they contradict each other. There's nothing you can do about it. And it would be a sveka dedina, and you would be machmer if we're talking about a din d'oraisa. But anyway, this is a fascinating sugya about how we treat malacha in general, especially the malacha of writing. When you write only one letter, how we treat that. Do we treat it as something significant in and of itself, or not even something significant in and of itself? Okay, we will stop here. Next time, we will continue with the 13th chapter. The 13th chapter, the first Mishnah covers a lot of different malachos, a lot of the different 39 malachos, I think like 3 or 4 different malachos are all in this first Mishnah in the 13th chapter. But for now, Hadron al Chabona, we have completed the 12th chapter, the chapter of Habona of Masechah Shabbos, and next time we continue venturing through Masechah Shabbos with the 13th chapter. We'll stop here.
Okay.